Okay, hello everyone. I'm trying to play some Chess960 again. I may take this challenge because why not? It's quite a bit longer game than I'm used to, but let's see if we can make something happen. Say hello there. Okay, so knight ef6, threatening my pawn. What to do? d3, g3, or even perhaps go for e5. Yeah, I'm gonna... Well... Yeah, I'm gonna play e5, I guess. Which is actually a bad move, because knight g4 wins a pawn. Well, no it doesn't, because one of my knights goes to f3. It would have been silly to sacrifice pawns so early. Okay, knight d5. Now I think I'm gonna play g3. Try to get some tempo on the knight. I mean, gain some time by attacking that knight there. I could double his pawns, but I don't think that's a good idea. Instead, I'm gonna play d4, I think, so that the diagonal from c1 to h6 is opened up for my bishop. And I may play my e-knight to d3 next. It is still unclear where this bishop wants to go. Maybe to g5 or d2. Well, on d2 it would be in the way of my rook, so that might not be a good idea. Then again, if I want to play this knight here and this knight here. Okay, and now I of course don't want to play knight d3 because of queen takes d4. So what to do? Well, Gate threatens knight c3 check, which would be mate also, so to be a bit careful. I think bishop takes d5 is the appropriate thing to do here. I think my opponent is a new player due to the question mark on both of the ratings that Sana Nu has, so I mean, sure, the pawn takes d5 was obviously an obvious move, but for some reason my opponent took quite a long time to think about it, and I have to play this knight to f3 in order to protect d4 so that I can play knight d3 next, or perhaps bishop to d2, though I may want to play my bishop to either e3 or g5. So knight d3 might be the next move I make. unless my opponent thinks of a interesting, a move that would require me to react to that. So we shall see what my opponent does. I may consider at some point queen h3, but maybe that's just a silly move because it just threatens h7 and then bishop on c8 might attack it after d6, so it might not be a good idea. Again, I think that knight d3 is the likeliest next move for me. I'm not sure what my opponent wants to do. Maybe even b6, defense of the bishop, who knows. Or perhaps play d6 here. It might be a bit annoying for me to face. I think for now I'm gonna drink some water because I have a dry mouth now. Okay, h6. That is a very strange move, in my opinion. It does cover the g5 square so that my knight or my bishop won't be able to go there. But knight d3 now seems like a good idea. Drive away the queen, the only attacking piece that my opponent now has. I should be doing quite okay, I think. Next move the bishop somewhere, then perhaps the rook and castle along, but it's of course possible to think that my king doesn't need to be castled, but I'm not sure if moves like a4 and then rook a3 is an idea I should consider. Maybe it is, because as long as the opposing king is on b8, the rook left might actually do something. Okay, this is the so the queen wants to go there. Fair enough. Now I might actually even consider a4, rook a3, rook b3, followed by knight g5. Not even castle, but it of course opens my king to a certain extent also. It's still unclear where I want this bishop to go to. e3 might be a thing, but then again now it protects b2, so tough to say. My opponent might consider knight e7 to knight f5, and go for that pawn, but so a4, knight e7, rook here, knight here, I go rook here, and the queen has to move, and the pawn would still be covered sufficiently by the knight on f3. Well, I think d6 should be in consideration for my opponent next, because then the bishop may go here, which might be annoying for me, since the rook is on d1 still. So what do I want to do? Do I want to go queen e1 with d6, then meh. I'm gonna play a4. Why not? I want to go for the aggressive play. Perhaps after, let's say, d6, pawn takes, rook takes, then as he threatens bishop g4, I might play rook e1, and after bishop g4 play... No, that's actually a bad idea, because the pawn on d4 at the end is under attack. My opponent might win a pawn there, so that's not a good idea. Tough to say, maybe h3 and g4 in order to prevent all the silliness. Okay, so my opponent does play d6, which might be a good idea. So I'm gonna do this. Take on d6. If rook takes, I might consider playing bishop f4. But this takes does weaken the d4 pawn, so after, let's say, g5, the pawn is under attack, and of course this also opens the possibility for knight f6, not perhaps immediately, because my opponent wants to take on d6, or that is what I think should happen, and that's interesting move also. Well, the queen d6. This seems even more threatening, so I'm gonna play that. Develop the bishop with the tempo. I may also want to consider knight e5 next. Because why not? Well, again, it depends what my opponent does, but I may have been better off playing rook a3 before this, because I might have prepared bishop f4 with rook c3 perhaps, and now I would have threatened take on c7, but okay, of course my opponent can do a lot of things to prevent that. Okay, another sip of water. Okay, I have time edge, but obviously it's not that big of a deal just yet. Our opponent has plenty of time left on the clock, and 3 seconds are added to the clock with each move, so there's no danger of time running out just yet. Now rook a3 makes a lot of sense, threatening rook c3 obviously, and taking here wouldn't matter because bishop takes c7 is mate. So basically whatever he does, I mean, well, g5 is actually a bit annoying, but I guess rook c3 is still strong enough reply, because taking here doesn't matter because I would take the queen and I'm slightly ahead in the material department. These longish Chess960 games might be a much better idea than the 10-minute games that I have previously played. Then again, I can play 10-minute games a lot faster, so that I would be able to create content faster. So quality over quantity, or the other way around, is the question that troubles me always. Anyway, in the past, especially when I was in work life, quality was this thing that really attracted me over quantity, because, well, I like to make things as good as possible, but okay. Will be interesting to see what my opponent does. Maybe rook d7 is almost forced. Because otherwise, I think my opponent is in huge trouble. Well, Xanadu might try to play g5, but rook g3, g takes f4, rook takes... okay, he plays that, but now I can play this move and fork both the queen and the rook. And I should be close to winning right now. Unless my opponent discovers some miraculous move that would save his position or her position. Not sure if I could have made these moves in 10-minute game. Probably I could have, because I have not used 10 minutes for the game just yet, but my opponent obviously has used considerably more time than I have. So I would have won on time. Unless, of course, the 10-minute game would have had an increment. Okay, so I'm gonna take the rook, give a check, probably bishop takes d7 now. Yes, that's indeed what happened. I could play knight c5 and fork these guys now. I also could play rook c3. And I think that is what I'm gonna do, because there's no way to protect c7 that I can see. Of course, bishop takes a4 is possible, but after rook takes c7, my opponent is in huge trouble. Okay, I might have should have seen that move, obviously, but I didn't. And actually, knight c3, rook c3 might have been a mistake. I should have played knight c5, traded those things, and then played rook c3, and then that c7 pawn would have fallen. But okay. I think knight e5 now. Just basically trying to take that bishop on c6. But maybe bishop takes a4 is now possible, because the knight blocks the bishop on f4. There might be other possibilities, rook e1, and then threaten to play knight c6 regardless of the position of the bishop. So there is certainly some interesting possibilities there. Now that he did that, I think I'm gonna increase the pressure with rook e1. Now taking on c6, or even playing knight c6 is quite strong, in my opinion. Because of the awkward position of the queen on e6. Of course, being the exchange up does help me quite a lot, but bishop to takes a4 is still rather awkward. But of course, if after bishop takes a4, I might just play knight to d3, threaten the queen, and threaten the take on c7. I should be doing quite well there. Very close to winning, actually. Okay, queen to f6, eh? The problem is I can take here now. It's quite strong. Knight cannot take back because of rook e8. Check. Being annoying. I mean, knight takes, rook check, knight in between, and then rook takes h8. And actually no. If knight takes here, rook check, knight here, then I just play either rook takes or bishop takes f7. Not sure which one is better, probably rook takes actually. And now I think queen to a6 threatening rook b3 mate is the best idea here. I don't see a defense. Well, knight to c8 might be of some help, but then rook e8 and then rook b3 mate is threatened once more. And of course c5 doesn't help because rook b3 is still mate. So the only defensive move is that one. But now I'm threatening queen takes c8 mate, rook takes c8 mate, or rook b3 mate. So there's really nothing that my opponent can do. To save the game. That was actually quite a nice game, in my opinion. after this game I have to check if this starting position is something that I have covered in my blog called 64 Square Madness that some of us call chess ... which you can find at chessdrifter.blogspot.com. There's really nothing that my opponent can do to save the game. Queen f5, hoping that I don't see rook b3 mate, perhaps. Basically the only defensive move, there is not even a check to give anywhere. So the game is over. I wonder if my opponent just lets time run out, which would be a bit annoying, but what can you do? Alright, just waiting for my opponent to resign or move something. But neither option is actually seen here, so desperately seeking for some move that would save the game, but obviously there isn't any. So thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye bye.